Welcome to another Facts and Faith Friday. We're really excited today to talk about something that's, sometimes considered taboo in many communities, but it's not a taboo topic in our community here, and that's mental health. And we are so excited to have with us again, Dr. Shawn Utsey talking about his film, The Central Lunatic Asylum for the Colored Insane. But before we get too far into today's programming, we are going to start this call and conversation off as we usually do, and that's with prayer. And we are so blessed to have with us today Dr. Patricia Beauchamp, who will open us up in prayer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let us pray together. God, we're so grateful for this day that you've given us. And we know, Lord, that even when you gave it that we might find peace in it and that we might have a day, Lord, where we not only connect to you, but we connect, God, to all of the wonderful things that will bless us mentally and health-wise. And so even today, as we gather, we thank you for the gift. And we ask, God, that you would bless our gathering again for this Friday. We thank you, God, that as we focus on mental health, we ask, Lord, that you would bless, God, Dr. Wynn and bless Dr. Dean and bless all of those that will share with us today. We know, God, that we struggle so. And even for those of us that are here on this Friday, we've come amidst all of the kind of tugs that have been on us, even to get us here, to allow us to pause for a few minutes, even to receive, God, the value of what will be shared today. So bless our gathering. And as always, not only may we receive, God, but when we leave from this place today, may we be encouraged and empowered to continue to be the healthy creations that you have created us to be. In the name of your Son, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Yes, because the struggle is real, but with God's help, we can get through and overcome all things. So thank you for being here with us today. With that, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Wynn. And again, I'm not going to steal your thunder, sir, because I think you might want to speak a little bit about where we've been and who we've been seeing and shaking hands with over the last couple of days. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, as always. And I really, one of the things I have enjoyed over the last 4 years with this community is that we open things and close things with prayer. So appreciate that prayer. In that context, I have to give a shout out to our Facts Faith Friday family. They were with me at one of the most critical moments that I have had in two ways. One, in being able to deliver and the address to Congress and others around our annual, or at least it's every other year report of the health of the country in the context of health cancer disparities. We were able to do that on behalf of the American Association of Cancer Research, which has a longstanding, highly recognized body of professionals, researchers in cancers. It's been around since 1907 with over 58,000 members. Virginia showed up this year because we were the first, and I was the first Virginian, if you would, to be able to not only chair that report, but to deliver that report. That was followed on the heels of being now able to take that report and go up on the Hill and actually be able to, with the Facts Faith Friday family and others, be able to make the pitch that, that science actually matters. That we both know that that if facts and, as we know, facts and faith are not at war with each other, as people would actually have you think, as Father Hesburgh would say, unless there is either bad research or bad science or bad religion. We don't have either here. As a result of that, we were able to meet with both Republicans and Democrats. And I actually have to say, and I ain't gonna go back, but I saw myself with the power of faith walking up in somebody's room that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, oh, look, I can be a witness to the fact that, you know what? I don't know how the Spirit moves with certain people, but with this folks moving in that room, the Spirit moves them to sort of understand what we were bringing to them. So I just want to say again to my Facts Faith Family Friday, appreciate you all, and hopefully you'll be even more of us next year. Having said that, There is something I need to bring as a PSA. I think I may have touched on this before quickly, but I want to bring this up again in two ways. That one of the most vulnerable groups we now have that has the fastest growing rates of poorest outcomes from cancer are young people between the ages of 20 and 35. It turns out that I think the last time I broached this, and I only touched this subject real quick the last time because I didn't have time, that we think about this as something like, well, why is that? We don't know. By the way, I told you the last time that it's about colorectal cancer, but it turns out I need two other pieces of information to give you, which is why I'm repeating this. It's that it's also breast cancer. We're now getting women as African-American women as young as 24 and 27 with essentially, unfortunately, recently this week I've heard with a terminal breast cancer diagnosis because everybody else was telling her that you couldn't have breast cancer at 20 something. What I want you to know is that you all have an additional layer of thinking about this, because not only is it young people between the ages of 20 and 35, but we're getting evidence that it's young people, particularly of color or from areas of persistent poverty, that are the hardest hit. So I know many of your congregations probably have these young men and women who are under normal circumstances, we would blow them off and are being blown off by doctors, not because they're bad people, but because we have not seen this type of cancer in that group before. So I say to you that the more we can educate and get out from your pulpits and your other health communications about the awareness of prevention, the awareness of seeing a doctor, the awareness of being your best advocate by asking when something don't feel right, take it to the next doc, take it wherever. But know that there is a Massey, and know that there is other programs around the country to help you out, because I don't want to hear of another 27-year-old that has gone so far that we're now talking about not responding to standard of care. We're now having a 27-year-old on clinical trials. So with that, I'm going to say the following. That report, it's called the Health Disparities Report for 2024, is written in a way and made accessible. I thought they were going to kick me out, but they didn't. When I said this shouldn't be just for politicians and for policymakers, which it's all going around all of the politicians on both the House and the Senate, but it should be accessible. What I'd like to do with your help is to be able to figure out who your health ministers are within the various faith-based groups and be able to actually have that distributed for free, a copy of the Health Equity Report and a link to where we can all get that information online. I think you'll find it helpful, even though it's a large document. It is not formidable, and it's formidable in a sense that, to be quite honest with you, it's usually easy, accessible, and quick reads and lots of bullet points. So I want to say thank you to the Fact Faith Friday crew for your prayers, for your faith, for your strength, and actually just for your, not beyond fellowship, for your familyness. I don't know what word to call it other than familyness. And we not only showed up, but we showed out on a hill. And I had to call my grandmother and said I had a Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego experience. And she said, well, what did you think how the outcome was going to come when you had people of faith around you? She goes, I know I taught you better than that. So anyways, I'm just giving another shout out to Cheryl Ivy Green, Sister Rudine, Pastor Williams, and Pastor Whitaker, because I don't even know, I was speechless. And yet I got an email just so to follow up that with saying that he not only told us what he was going to do, but he followed through in what he said he was going to do. So thank you all so much. Appreciate you.
Yes, and we appreciate you, Dr. Wynn. You're always very humble about these things, but he forgot to tell you that the debut of this report was, to Congress, was in this camera-filled room, packed to capacity, with him sort of at the forefront, sort of being chair of the AACR, and basically one of the author, I guess, the orchestrator, the whatever term you want to use it, bandmaster with respect to this report. Dr. Wynn, we're going to put you on the spot, and I think perhaps at another open Facts and Faith Friday, it makes sense for you to give a high-level briefing, right? Whatever, we might give you 7 minutes, we'll see. but basically all the highlights so that everyone knows, not only the health ministers, but our actual congregational leads and people in the community understand, what were some of the what were some of the suggestions and recommendations based upon this report.
I would love that. And I forgot, but I have to give a shout out to Reverend Pierce and for Sister and Dr. Anithia Sutton for also showing up all Fast-Faced Friday strong. So again, it was a team effort, and I would love the opportunity to be able to do that. And in fact, I've actually talked with Dr. Marge Frody, who's the head of the organization, who said she would actually be glad to come on one of these Fast-Faced Friday and be able to talk with me, if you want, about that report.
We'd love that.
And of course, your vice chair, Amy Williams, was there trying to keep me in line when I started saying things that was a little bit off.
Look, Amy
In
Williams.
the wrong office. So
you and Amy Williams, y'all came fifth. I mean, it was, sometimes we think we don't have voices. And I always sort of say, the interesting thing is we say people don't have voices. Well, we know that they can actually, the voices are fine. It's our hearing that may not be as good. And so on that day on the Hill, those 2 days, I think we brought the voices of the people that the science matters and that the resources matter and that the resources actually has to come from the capital that have to care about the people that we take care of and that they are supposedly impacting. So it was a wonderful time, and hopefully we'll get even more folks involved over the next year. Looking forward to it.
Outstanding. All right. With that, friends, we are going to turn to our Facts and Faith Fridays feature spotlight and talk about Stroke Smart Richmond. We have with us, we're very fortunate today to have with us Dr. Fieser. Dr. Ramana Fieser.
It's Ramana.
Ramana.
Oh.
You can call me Rudine later, but it's fine. Dr. Fieser is Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at VCU Medical Center in Richmond, Virginia, and she served as the Director of Quality and Safety for the Emergency Department since 2015. Dr. Fieser served as Interim Chief Quality and Safety Officer for VCU Health from September 2020 to February 2022. She received her MD from George Washington University School of Medicine in Washington, D.C., and did her emergency medicine residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Maryland. You're very highly credentialed, ma'am. I'm so excited to have you here. You serve as an ED physician champion for stroke, and you're co-chair of the Stroke Smart Richmond Steering Committee, which you're going to share with us a little bit more about today. Thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm really excited to have your time to share about Stroke Smart Richmond. And as much as we do want to look at prevention of stroke, Stroke Smart Richmond is more about the recognition and the intervention. If we go to the next slide. So part of the reason I'm here today is May is National Stroke Awareness Month. So we're excited about the timing of being able to present this information. And because I knew this was part of the Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center program, I wanted to at least share that actually people with cancer, whether it's active or not, are twice as likely to have a stroke and twice as likely to die from a stroke. So I wanted to just make that connection for this audience. If we go to the next slide. So this is something that our marketing department developed. And so in addition to facts about stroke, especially knowing that it's the #1 cause of disability of all the diseases that we have, and looking at a lot of the risk factors, you can kind of see a lot of the risk factors actually intersect with cancer as well. And then recognizing either BFAST or FAST as a way to spot a stroke. And then the intervention would be calling 911 because time matters, especially when it comes to brain. And I'll tell you more about that in the next slide. So when we talk about Stroke Smart, and we can, thank you, wanted to tell you what that actually means. And it includes these 3 parts. One is to be stroke smart. So for people to know what a stroke is and how to spot it. So either using BFAST or FAST as a tool. And then once someone spots a stroke, the importance of calling 911. And so kind of the mantra is spot a stroke, stop a stroke by calling 911, and by doing so, save a life. As part of this education, because everyone, education can only last so long, we actually have visual aids, which include magnets and wallet cards to kind of be a reference that people can often pull out or look at their fridge and kind of be reminded of, yes, I am seeing a stroke in front of me. This is something that I should call 911 about. And then the last part is we're trying to promote everyone here and in our community to become a stroke smart champion, because it often takes more than the patient. Often the patient suffering from a stroke might not recognize they're having one or might not be able to speak. And so often it takes the bystanders, so all of us, to spot that stroke and to call 911. So our efforts are to educate and train others to be stroke smart. And Stroke Smart Richmond is all about anyone who lives here, learns here, works here, prays here, or plays here. So everyone. Next slide, please. Wanted to share a little bit of the timeline. I'm part of the Virginia Stroke System Task Force, and we petitioned the governor at the time, this was in December of 2021, to make Virginia a stroke smart Commonwealth. And so that proclamation was made, and our current governor helped support it, is in videos that help support it as well. After that, in March of 2022, the Stroke Smart Virginia Work Group became established, and Alan Stillman is the founder of Stroke Smart Virginia, and so he leads that group. And a few months later in 2022, we actually came up for the idea of we would like Richmond to be a stroke smart city. And so then it involved about 6 months of work for our government liaison group to meet with the mayor's office, the city council. And on January 23rd of last year, we, with the mayor and the city council, made the proclamation for Richmond to be a stroke smart city. And if we go to the next slide, this kind of captures at City Hall with the mayor and the city council and different VCU health partners, and including Virginia Department of Health as well, and some leaders in the city. We made this proclamation. And if you go to the next slide. So this video is something I'd like to play. It's only 2 minutes, but it really kind of highlights what Stroke Smart Richmond is all about.
Somebody spotted me having a stroke and acted fast to give me medical care. I'm living proof time is critical. All of us need to be stroke smart.
Stroke symptoms can be more subtle than trauma or a heart attack. You can recognize stroke symptoms by remembering fast. Facial droop or an uneven smile, arm weakness or numbness, difficulty speaking or understanding, and T stands for time. Call 911 immediately.
Every 40 seconds in the U.S., someone has a stroke. At the first signs of a stroke,
don't wait. Call 911 and we'll get you to medical help fast.
Time is brain. Roughly 2 million brain cells die every minute unless blood flow is restored. You need advanced medical care within 4.5 hours for clot-busting drugs to work. Every 4 minutes, someone dies from a stroke.
The stroke death rate in Richmond is about 80 per 100,000. Sadly, the rate for African Americans is 100 per 100,000. Becoming a stroke smart city will help address this disparity and save lives.
Becoming a school system that is stroke smart is one of the best things we can do for our community.
Congregations and clergy can help spot the signs of a stroke. Join us in becoming a stroke smart church.
You know, stroke is the #1 cause of permanent disability, and it's a leading cause of death. VCU Health is proud to join our Richmond community to spot a stroke, to stop a stroke, and to save a life.
Becoming a stroke smart city requires the support of our entire community. Seconds matter. It all comes down to you learning how to spot a stroke and act fast, F-A-S-T. Please join Richmond and VCU Health in becoming stroke smart. Together, we can save lives.
And then I just have a few more slides just to talk about what the real steps look like. It's not enough to make this proclamation. How are we going to get everyone to be stroke smart? Really here to talk about what all of you can help us do. So part of it, our steering committee is all about the structure and the people. And so far we have representatives from all of these major entities. So it includes Richmond City's government and its mission to have a healthier Richmond, especially Richmond and Henrico Health District. We actually can reach a third of the people of the city through the school system. So not only the children and their parents and their families, but also the people that work for the Richmond Public Schools. In addition, we have the Department of Social Services for Richmond, Senior Connections, Places of Worship. Libraries is a really popular way to kind of reach a lot of people as well. And then, of course, more of our medical partners, so EMS, Stroke Smart Virginia, pharmacies. They actually say more people will go to a pharmacy like more often than they would to their primary care doctor. So thinking about the transactions at a pharmacy, can we use that as an opportunity to get some of this information out? Same thing with medical practices. You know, a lot of the focus there is often on prevention, but at the same time, can we also educate about recognition and intervention? And then of course, our VCU Health partnership with the city. If we go to the next slide, our process. So really, we try to keep this map at the center of what we do. And perhaps many of you have seen this. This is back from 2016. I haven't seen an updated map, but you can see just within a 5-mile radius of Richmond, there's a 20-year life expectancy difference. And so this is something we need to pay attention to when it comes to diseases like stroke, cancer, and other things. And so we want to make sure that we get out there to all of the zip codes of Richmond, including those that might be more underserved. And then incorporating entities where annual education is already performed. So often government employees, the health system employees already have required an annual education. How do we incorporate this stroke smart education within it? And then for any of you that have events either at your places of worship or at places of work, we'd like to join those events. So that way we can have additional opportunities to reach out to people and partner with existing services and events rather than creating new ones. And the way we reinforce the message is by handing out magnets and wallet cards and posters. If you go to the next slide, which I believe is the final slide that I have, we want to know our measures of success of this. And some immediate short-term measures would be, you know, how many magnets do we hand out? How many people do we touch, like at this presentation today? What events are we reaching out to? And what are the location of those events? Again, we want to get everywhere. And then who are our list of partners, and can we grow that list of partners as well? And of course, what's near and dear to all of us, especially in the healthcare field, is the long-term measures. Can we move the mark on the patient's last known well time to ED arrival, meaning can we shorten that time? Can we increase the number of patients with stroke that are arriving by EMS and not, you know, just showing up later on by walking into our emergency department? Can we also increase that number of people that come in the window where we can offer treatments? So if people arrive in the first 4.5 hours of a stroke and are eligible, they can receive a clot busting drug. But if they arrive after that 4.5 hour window, they're no longer eligible for that kind of treatment. There's also thrombectomies where we can actually remove the clot from the brain vessel. So in the emergency department this month, in honor of Stroke Month, we actually are giving out to every patient possible in the emergency department and their visitors information about stroke, which includes that informational page with risk factors and how to spot a stroke, and it includes the magnet and the wallet cards. We actually have it in Spanish as well. And these are at no cost from the Virginia Department of Health. They actually mailed it to us at no cost as well. So different organizations can actually even order these materials to give out to their members or people they might touch. So with that, I'll end the presentation that I have on Stroke Smart Richmond and open to answering any questions that anyone might have.
Dr. Peaser, thank you so much for sharing, I guess, your life-saving work here. That video, the 2 minutes that we watched, I think is incredibly impactful. So I wonder if it's possible for us to get that separate to share with our pastors and community leaders, that they can share very quickly, you know, and announcements at their own churches to get the word out. And would you mind putting your contact information in the chat? So
Yes.
I think the point about making sure that, you know, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel with having separate events just for, you know, sharing information about stroke. We could have that, our Stroke Smart, we could have that as part of, you know, the normal events that happen in the life of a church or life of the community. Thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. With that, I am going to turn to, we have a segment with Dr. Jessica Brown. I think Reverend Rachel, she has a pre-recorded message for us.
Hello, folks. I'm so sorry I can't be with you synchronously today, but I just wanted to share a little bit, reminding you that May is Mental Health Awareness Month and giving you some information and also some strategies about how we can navigate mental health as faith communities. So first, I don't need to repeat this. We know why mental health matters. Mental health is a part of our overall health and wellness and wholeness. It impacts our physical health, it impacts our work life, it impacts our relationships, it impacts the way we feel about ourselves. It also impacts the way we engage with our faith and with faith communities. So this is a piece of what we do as faith communities. It's not something separate. There's an organization called Mental Health America that compiles mental health statistics yearly for all 50 states. And so I want to talk just a bit about the national statistics and then move into the statistics for Virginia and some things that we can do as faith leaders. So first, I just want to bring to your awareness that I'm going to send you these slides. So I'll have Reverend Rachel send you the slides so you can have the hot links. But here are some of the kind of major takeaways in terms of mental health in the US. About 1 in 5 folks experience mental illness. Those numbers have stayed basically the same. We do see a bit of an increase in terms of 5% of adults reporting serious thoughts of suicide. That's something we don't often talk about in our churches, but we really need to attend to it. Another area that we see increasing is in youth ages 12 to 17. Actually, the younger youth, like elementary age youth, those numbers are also increasing a bit, but we're seeing for the latest numbers, around 15% of youth ages 12 to 17, so think high school age, are reporting at least one major depressive episode, and about 4% report substance use disorders. So these numbers are especially alarming because when we look at the number of folks who are actually receiving treatment, about half of those folks nationally, 56%, who have mental health symptoms are not receiving treatment. We'll talk about sort of some of the issues related to that. So in Virginia, in terms of prevalence, when we're compared to other states, Virginia is 20th in the nation. So in the mid-range, in terms of the number of Virginians that we see experiencing mental health conditions, and for youth, 21st. So again, right in the middle. There were some recent shifts to behavioral health laws that actually negatively impacted our score. So we have less access to healthcare right now. And again, there's a link to an article that explains that in a little more detail. When we talk about access to care, so relative to how many people are actually having symptoms, how many people are seeking treatment, Virginia ranks 37th in the nation. A part of this is due to insurance coverage, so folks who are totally uninsured. Some folks might be insured, but not insured for what we call behavioral health coverage, which is mental health care. There are provider workforce issues. So we do not have enough providers, therapists, case managers, especially psychiatric providers, those folks who are receiving meds. We're 40th nationally for that. So Virginia is definitely experiencing a workforce issue. As you all know, there's also stigma and the fact that mental health treatment is a big commitment, right? So you might see your cardiologist or your endocrinologist every 3 months versus for a therapy appointment, you might be going every week or every other week, right? And so in addition to adults not receiving treatment, one of the big concerning issues too is that we also see youth not receiving treatment. Overall, in the state of Virginia, about 55% of those adolescents are not receiving treatment. At the national level, when we look at just Black youth, about 90% are not receiving treatment. And so what I want to impress upon all of us as faith leaders is we really have the power to stand in the gap and shift some of these statistics, particularly around access to care. So how can we do that? You've heard me say this before. You can talk, teach, preach about mental health in your congregations. May is a great month to do it because it's Mental Health Awareness Month and we're talking about it. But my encouragement to you is to be having these conversations year round. We've talked about making connections with local providers, and that's one of the reasons why we have providers in the area come and spend time with us on First Fridays so you all can get to know them. I know many of you have done programming at your churches. When you're thinking about youth ministries or folks who might be changing careers, we can encourage entry into the mental health workforce, support people in applying for graduate schools and those kinds of things. But there's also a huge part of the mental health workforce that does not require graduate study. We also want to focus on advocating for laws that support folks with mental illness and support Virginia's behavioral health workforce. So again, another link to the current initiatives at the state level surrounding behavioral health. It's really important that we as community leaders understand how these laws are impacting folks at the individual level and advocate to our lawmakers so that folks can get the support that they need. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we want to prioritize relationship because when you know people in your congregation, you can tell when they're not doing okay, when they need additional support, when they need resources. And that's when we stand in the gap and provide the pastoral care role and we get them connected with some other resources. So you might be thinking, what are the other resources I can send people to? I've compiled a list. A first stop for mental health care is your local community services board. That's the government-funded agency in your locality. They have a wide range of services. They also can provide you a referral if they are not the best fit. So it's a good place to start locally. If you have folks that are in crisis, the 988 hotline is available 24 hours a day. It's a great resource for folks who might be having suicidal ideation. It can also get people connected with resources if they don't know where to look. There's a link here for the Department of Behavioral Health help page, the different sort of variety of resources that are available in the state of Virginia. And also a warm line is something that people use when they're struggling, but they're not suicidal. So it gives people a chance to chat with someone, have support, but not be at the point where they're in total crisis, right? And finally, I've provided some websites that you can use that give you databases to search for therapists. As always, especially folks in the Central Virginia area, you can also reach out to me. I can help get you connected with resources if you have a particular referral you're looking for. But my hope is that what this gives you an opportunity to think about is where are my points of intervention and what is the role I can play with limiting stigma and increasing people's access to care.
Even when Dr. Brown is not physically with us, she has so much energy. And oh my goodness, I have to tell you, for those of you who are not familiar with her, she is a Facts and Faith Friday resident therapist. So she, helps shepherd and provide advice to our shepherds, right, in the community. But what a blessing. So I think there's a lot of takeaways there. We're going to share the slides. And hopefully you'll sort of elevate this in your discussions and the people within your spheres of influence and the congregations that you serve. With that, we are going to turn to our local celebrity. We have a lot of local celebrities on this call, but we're gonna turn it over to Dr. Shawn Utsey. Dr. Utsey is a professor with joint appointments in the Department of Psychology and the Department of African American Studies, where he serves as the acting chair. Dr. Utsey is not a stranger to the Facts and Faith community. He's been here before, letting us know about the film that he was working on. He's an engaged scholar who studies how race-related stress impacts the physical, psychological, and social well-being of African Americans. Most recently, he's examined how trauma is manifested in the victims of racial violence. Dr. Utsey is busy. He's an active filmmaker. His most recent feature-length documentary, which he's going to talk to us about today, is the Central Lunatic Asylum for the Colored Insane. He premiered in September 2022, where it explores the history of the first psychiatric facility for African Americans in the United States. I could go on and on about Dr. Utsey. You don't want to hear any more from me. You want to hear from him. But we are just so blessed to have you with us again, Dr. Utsey. I think we were all on the edge of our seats the last time you were here. So I'm going to be quiet and let you speak.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for inviting me back. Pleasure to be here. I sent the link for the film. I hope that some of you had a chance to watch it if you haven't seen it before. I'm going to use 5 minutes to kind of give you a context, and perhaps we can have some discussion about the film. If there are questions or comments, I'd like to entertain those. I think it's important to understand that mental health has a political and historical context. So it's not simply people who have a psychiatric disorder and they get help. There is a whole context that's historical and socio-political that explains mental health. And my documentary on the Central Lunatic Asylum for Colored Insane was really about the history of mental health treatment in the Black community. And I think we all can agree that many things are meant to be viewed in a cultural context. And mental health is no different. Mental health has a cultural context as well. Now, we have uniformed mental health treatment in the United States because there's an economic component that makes it expedient to be able to charge people based on diagnostic categories and such, right? But in other countries, and even in other communities, mental illness looks different at times. We can think of many instances in which people can kind of seem normal until they come to the family reunion, right? And then other Black folk can figure out something's not right with them, right? So there are things that are really expressed in the cultural context. I want to give you a brief history of that context just to make it interesting, right? So I want to spend 5 minutes talking about this as a backdrop for the film. This presentation is called From Drapetomania to Protest Psychoses, Racism and the Representation of Psychology. Now, I want to first describe the origin of psychology. We tend to think psychology is something that has always looked at human behavior and the ways in which people behave and respond to their environments. But no, psychology, psychiatry, psychology, has its roots in the Greek language, and it means soul. Psyche means the soul. Ology means the study of or branch of knowledge. So psychology was the study of the soul. That's how this endeavor began, right? Philosophers were interested in answering questions about why we exist and why we think. And they began to think about the soul. And that's how psychology began. Now, I don't want to offend anybody, particularly in a faith-based audience, but I want to provide a context for the criminalization of Blackness in the pre-Christian era or the Christian era. And this is not to say that the text is intending to communicate this, but many Southern planters, many Southern plantation owners used the text, the scriptures, to advance a scientific racism that would be used to justify slavery. So we all know the curse of Ham. I'm not going to preach to the preachers, but the curse of Ham was really, in my estimation, the origin story for the criminalization of blackness. And you'll see how this connects in a minute when we get to psychiatry or mental illness in Black folks. It also is the origin story of Blackness as immorality and Blackness kind of a sexual predator trope that came out of the story of Ham. I'm not going to go through the story, but it's really the story of Noah's Ark and what happened after the Ark landed and what went down between Noah and his 3 sons. As a consequence, Ham wasn't cursed, his descendants were cursed. And so we also know that that this curse, biblically speaking, really refers to how the world was populated with peoples after the flood. And so Shem, Ham's descendants, are in Asia, Japheth, Europe, and Ham's Africa. And so this is kind of really speaking to how we began with the narrative of trying to understand Black folks, particularly using scriptures and explaining pathology and other deviant behaviors that Southern planters used to justify slavery. It wasn't their fault. God divined this because the curse was to be in servitude to your brothers, which would be Europeans and Asians. And so we think about the slave trade, the Arab slave trade, that would be the Asians, and the European slave trade would be Japheth's brethren. This is important because later on, psychology would begin to kind of morph into a more scientific endeavor with the scientific revolution. Everybody was trying to get on board with this new way of looking at the world, and psychology was no different. They began to look at empiricism, the biological basis of behavior, anatomical studies, meaning brain size, cranium, and all these kind of things, various diagnoses, and also mechanistic philosophy to explain human behavior. It was no longer spirit. It was no longer a spiritual endeavor. It was now trying to evolve into the study of human behavior and science. Now, this really also leads into the eugenics movement in Europe. Sir Francis Galton, who was Charles Darwin's cousin, coined the term eugenics. And in Europe, and now keep in mind, there were no Black folks in Europe, but Europeans amongst themselves understood that there were variations amongst various groups of Europeans. It's only now, after the early 19th century, when we created this idea of whiteness, that we think about white people as just white people. But that's not really how it began, and it's not true. White folks are as diverse as any other group of people, and eugenics understood that. That's why they were trying to create a hierarchy with Nordic whites at the top and Southern Europeans at the bottom. They were going to regulate who could have children, who could procreate, who couldn't, and they were trying to create a more optimal society. I don't want to say a master race, but essentially a more optimal society. And they had an idea to do that. Now, during the 1850s, Samuel Cartwright, who was a Louisiana planter, or a Louisiana physician, he was a physician in Louisiana, and his specialization was on slaves. If you had a problem on your plantation with your slaves behaving funny, you would call Samuel Cartwright. Samuel Cartwright came up with two diagnoses that he would apply to enslaved Africans. One was called drapetomania, the flight from home madness. When enslaved people ran away to be free, Samuel Cartwright said that is a psychiatric disorder called drapetomania, flight from home madness. The way to cure that is with the lash. The other disorder that Samuel Cartwright diagnosed Black folks with was dysynthesia ethiopica. This was kind of when folks, or called rascality. This is when enslaved people would shuck their work, or they would steal chickens or kill pigs or somehow sabotage in the interest of their resistance to their enslavement. That too was seen as a mental illness by Samuel Cartwright. Now, Samuel Cartwright wasn't some crackpot. Samuel Cartwright was an influential physician in the antebellum South. How do we know? Because the Supreme Court decision, the Dred Scott decision, which said that Black folks have no rights that white folks are bound to acknowledge or to respect, Samuel Cartwright wrote an addendum to that Supreme Court decision. So we know that he was influential and important. He wasn't some kook or some crankpot. Now, I'll be quick. Benjamin Rush, the father of psychiatry, he talked about Black skin being a form of leprosy. Carl Jung is the father of American psychology. He viewed himself as an expert on Black people. And he said Black people have one less layer of brain than everybody else. Everett's Era Eberhardt was a psychiatrist in DC, and he said that slavery was really a aid that allowed Black folks to get a leg up and to be able to get beyond mimicking simple behaviors. Cardina and Oversee, why are they important? I'm trying to be mindful of time so we can have a discussion. They began to, in the 50s, they began to soften their stance on racism in psychology, and they no longer said it was genetic or biologically based. They said that Black folks were inferior because of culture, that racism had deformed the psyches of Black people, and therefore the personality of the Negro was really traced to his difficult living conditions, right? Black people suffer from low self-esteem. Now, I know that when I was in grad school in the 90s and 2000, self-esteem was really the subject of every person's dissertation, particularly around Black folks. It was substance abuse, sexual behavior, everything was about self-esteem. Now, I'll wrap up with this. In the 60s, we noticed a new diagnosis. And these things are real, folks. This was called protest psychoses. In the 50s, from the 20s to the 50s, schizophrenia was viewed as a majority white disorder, right? And was seen as harmless. It really wasn't something that people were afraid of. But around the 60s, schizophrenia began to emerge along ethnic lines. And as it became a Black disease, it became a more violent disorder in terms of science and how they were looking at it. There was a paper written by Bromberg and Simon in the General Archives, the Archives of General Psychiatry. This is no a slouch journal. This is really an important journal in psychiatry. And they wrote an article called Protest Psychoses, in which they outlined their theory behind protest psychoses. And they said that protest psychoses was the result of Black men developing hostile and aggressive feelings and delusional anti-white attitudes after listening to the words of Malcolm X and joining the Black Muslims. And that the groups that preach resistance to white society were perpetuating this protest psychoses. They also said that the symptomatology was observed for protest psychoses was influenced by social pressure, including the civil rights movement, the Black Muslim group, and other African subcultural ideologies, right? These are seen as the impetus for the onset of protest psychoses. This is no different than drapetomania, and the act of wanting to be free was seen as abnormal behavior in Black people. And that really, folks, was part of what I was trying to communicate in my documentary in terms of the history of Central State Lunatic Asylum for Colored Insane, how it evolved, how they treated Black folks. It was really a plantation where they extracted free labor to advance their bottom line. So I wanted to kind of stop here so we can have some discussion, but hopefully that was going to provide a backdrop to understand that the documentary was really much broader than the history of the institution, but a context for mental health treatment in the Black community. So I'd like to stop in the interest of time to see if there are questions or comments.
Well, Dr. Utsey, I can't tell you how many text messages I got about, hey, can he send us those slides? Hopefully you will share those slides.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, thank you. But I have a couple questions, but I'm going to be quiet and see if there are others who have questions first. Drapetomania, had never heard of it before, but I do think it odd that if somebody just wants to be free, that you got to give a name to that, because obviously something's wrong, because it upsets the status quo, right? Mm-hmm. But going to your documentary, how are you able to sort of find records? Because we know that, folks don't necessarily find value in things that relate to people of color. So the idea of you being able to go back and get records with respect to the first psychiatric facility that housed Black folks, I'm just figuring out where did you start?
Yeah, Dr. King Davis, who was the former commissioner of mental health in Virginia, wrote a grant through the Mellon Foundation to archive and digitize the records. So I connected with him, and once I connected with him, it was really raining records, if you will. And you're right that the Library of Virginia was planning to destroy the records. They had no use for them. And so Dr. Davis showed up and requested that he be allowed to archive them. Now, there are still some records. We have the admissions records and some treatment records, but there are rules, as I'm sure HIPAA rules, as you all know, that prevent the more recent records within 75 years, I believe, from being released. But they have records, and the important thing is to recover them and to preserve them. Now, there are also admissions records that are still on site at the Petersburg location in an open room with no security, no heat-controlled, temperature-controlled rooms that are really at risk. I really got to see the very first patient entered into the logbook, admitted to Central State Hospital at that facility. It's there. So they have the records going back to day one.
Wow. Can you give us a flavor for those of us who've not watched the documentary yet? And after this conversation, I am gonna run, not walk, to watch the documentary. Give us a flavor for some of the diagnoses that, you know, were more prevalent amongst those that were admitted, or what were the symptoms that some of these folks.
Yeah, this was really one of the most disturbing things about the documentary on my research, because we know about convict leasing. There's a documentary called Slavery by Another Name, in which they talk about when slavery ended, there was still a huge need for labor, right? And then to fill that labor gap or that vacuum for labor, what they did was they created nuisance crimes like vagrancy, loitering, to find opportunities to arrest the newly freedmen, right? And they would arrest them and give them long sentences on labor camps. And from those camps, they would lease them out to farmers. They leased them out to the people to the railroad companies who were building the railroads to West Virginia and going out west. They leased them out to other work plantations and sharecroppers so they could continue to extract labor. Psychiatric care was almost identical in practice. The Central State Lunatic Asylum was really a plantation. But they justified that approach because it was based on the moral model of psychiatric care, meaning that we want to get you back to those things you were doing before you had a psychotic break, right? And for Black folks, that was plantation labor. And so they had the Black folks working in the fields at Central State Hospital, creating crops, farm animals, and the hospital was turning a profit from their crops. They were also leasing out patients to Western State to wait on the white patients at the other hospitals. So these were some of the unusual ways in which treatment was affected. But now here's what would get you admitted. And this is not spelled out in the records, but as was the case to get you arrested, if you were behaving recklessly in the presence of white folks, sometimes people call it reckless eyeballing, making eye contact with white people would be seen as a challenge to their authority. That might create an opportunity for them to kind of seek retribution. Now, some of the things included masturbation, excessive masturbation could get you admitted. They seen that as a cause. Domestic tension or not even violence, but domestic issues could get you admitted. Religious excitement was another cause of mental illness that might get you admitted. And so the kind of things that he created to describe the onset of mental illness in Black folks was really spectacular. It was, and even some of the things they were doing in terms of sterilizations, electric shock therapy, and lobotomies, without any oversight or IRB approval required. There were no IRBs at that time. Doctors were simply having a field day, doing their own private experiments, and they wrote about it, right? There was one guy, a Black guy, who's kind of famous because he's in the picture of a couple of books in his jail uniform. He was lobotomized after having killed 2 wives. The first wife, he was admitted to jail and then sent to the psychiatric hospital. Then he came back after he was released and killed the second wife. Then they lobotomized him. And the physician wrote that it cured him because now he was docile, didn't cause any problems. And he was, advocating this as an approach. So they're really, I don't want to talk too long because there's so much to say. But I want to see if you have other questions. I hope I answered some of the question you asked.
Oh, that and more. Like, who knew treatment was to go out and work for other people? Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I need to watch this. And again, you're gonna get tired of us, but we need to have you back. And I would like to actually have some congregations think about if it makes sense to have us all come together in person, watch the documentary, and have a Q&A with you. I think that would be very powerful on so many different levels. So let us kind of workshop that one and come back to you. But before we let Dr. Utsey go, and thank you for being so mindful of the time, because we gave you none to tell us all the things that you needed to. What do you see after this documentary? What is your next goal?
Related to this, or am I?
Well, I don't know. You got a lot going on, sir. So you answer that anyway.
Well, I think it's important. This becomes important because we just know of the case of Errol Atenyo, who was killed at Central Lunatic Hospital recently. Well, a couple of years ago, he had a psychiatric crisis. He was taken to the hospital, then the Central State Hospital, where he was killed by the deputies and employees. They were charged, but recently they were exonerated. No trial will happen. That was kind of the importance of the point of the criminalization of Blackness in relation to mental illness. Many times when our expressions of mental illness is seen as criminality and is dealt with by law enforcement. We need to increase awareness around these issues. We need to figure out how family can intervene in a way whereby the first line of defense is not to call the police, because we have to have ways to intervene that will keep them safe. And this is not accusing all law enforcement of anything, just acknowledging the reality that when we call the police, people die. When Errol's family called the police, they thought he would get help. He was having a psychiatric crisis. He was murdered, and no one is being held responsible. Mental illness in the Black community is not, there's no one size fits all when we're talking about mental health in the Black community.
Again, fascinating, Dr. Utsey. Thank you for elevating this and making it real in our current times, like how this history is sort of impacting what we're seeing. We've run out of time, people. I'm going to ask Reverend Rachel if you could drop me in the chat the announcements. The one thing I will sort of highlight is the fact that there is which of these I'll highlight? Our next Facts and Faith Friday session is June 19th at 3 p.m. There'll be resources for families. We'll hear about how Condra Brown works directly with child care providers to increase the supply of publicly funded early childhood care and education options for families in the Commonwealth. Everyone, you heard it, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We've given you some tools, some resources that you can really be ambassadors to normalize the conversation about mental illness, about therapy, about our history. You got to see the documentary. And with that, I am going to turn it over to someone who was featured in one of the Stroke Smart video, the beautiful Reverend Aria Kirkland Harris from Ebenezer Baptist Church. She's going to close us out in prayer. Thank you to Dr. Utsey for being here. Thank you, Dr. Feeser. Thank you, Dr. Patricia Goldchamp, and Dr. Brown. Thank you.
All right, let's pray, family. Oh, gracious God, we thank you for your presence in us and among us, and for how you hold us all together. We thank you for the gift of the Faith and Facts community, and we don't take for granted the gift of spending time with people who are committed to caring for your people. And so, God, just as we worship you in spirit and in truth, we testify that facts and faith indeed do go hand in hand. And so we ask that you make us faithful proclaimers of this truth, of these facts and our faith, and help us to distill and internalize the information that we learned today so that we can share it with others. For we pray that no one will be kept from the healing and the help that they need. God, we know that you are a healer, and so we pray for those who are in distress. And we ask that you lead us all to the healing and health that we need. Send your healing down through the generations. God, guide our hearts and our minds and heal our bodies. We love you, Lord, and we ask all of these things in the mighty name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you for that beautiful blessing. Again, thank you, family. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you, Dr. Sutton. Thank you, Reverend Rachel. Bye.
Everybody take care. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Blessings and peace.
Thank you, friends. Thank you so much.